Well, we're here for another season of Mandalorian and discussion shows and all that amazing stuff. And I'm here with someone who, unfortunately, with one of his main podcasts, is going through a little bit of a drought at the moment. So I've poached him, brought him in for episode 1, and it's Brett Scott of Marvel Plus and the Daily BS. And we were just having a nice little chat and catch up about the MCU and some of the other films and things that we've been watching and stuff beforehand. But I want to ask you, with Mandalorian, Star Wars and things, were you excited for Mandalorian Series 3? And have you watched all the other sort of live action things? Like, how has your Star Wars been for the last sort of year or so?
I was absolutely excited for Mando 3. I thought Mandalorian Season 2 was basically perfect. As a show, the entire season was so damn good all the way through. And I thought it just ended like as a perfect crescendo at the end. I thought it was so damn good. I have kept up on everything live action Star Wars. Where I've missed is when it comes to animated stuff. Mm-hmm. So I'm behind. I haven't watched any of this season of Bad Batch. The Star Wars, what was the anthology series?
So there's Visions, but there's also Tales of the Jedi.
But neither of those have I watched. Mm-hmm. So all the live action stuff, though, Andor is one of the best things I watched all last year.
Agreed.
I absolutely love. I thought it was like the most adult Star Wars I've ever seen. It was, it felt like it was way more aimed towards me. It was the kind of stuff I've been wanting, but thinking I'd never get because they have to skew it towards a younger audience, or so I thought. But this felt very grown up. So after Boba Fett, not really doing a whole lot for me, besides the Mando episodes, which I thought were phenomenal. Mando 2.5, and then Kenobi was good, but I nothing holds a candle. Not even Mandalorian holds a candle to Andor right now. So right now, if I'm ranking them, it's Andor, then Mandalorian season 2, then probably Mandalorian season 1, live action.
Yeah, they're all fair comments. Yeah, it's one of those, I love Mandalorian, but I'm in the same boat as you. I think Andor just completely blows it out of the water. For me, I think Mandalorian it's amazing because as a Star Wars fan, it's really cool, and there's lots of connections, and obviously there's the cameos in season 2, which there have been critiques from the cameo. A friend of mine, Ben of Star Wars Timeline, who I'm sure I'll have on this season of Mandalorian, he doesn't like Mandalorian as much as, he thinks Andor is phenomenal, and he loves a lot of the animated stuff, but he hasn't been as fussed about the live action things. And I think with a lot of the live action, there are valid critiques. I really enjoyed Kenobi. I thought it was good, but I thought, again, it was quite flawed. It was kind of like, I won't spoil Ant-Man Quantumania, but we were talking about Ant-Man, and it's it's got some really cool stuff in there, really great. But because of just a few elements that really could have been tweaked and done maybe slightly differently or slightly better, it would have elevated it a lot higher. And I felt with Kenobi that had it as well. I was like, the finale with him, everything with him and Vader, I thought was phenomenal. The first encounter and the last, incredible. I think it just, a lot of the in-betweeny stuff, and there was, the infamous coat scene, and it's there's just these little bits of silliness, and then Boba Fett couldn't really figure out what it was trying to be, and then Andor was just what I describe, obviously, because we spoke about it, I think one of the later episodes, and it was this is just a HBO Max style Star Wars. This is an adult, mature show that isn't reliant on cameos, and it's funny, and I said it, I think, in every episode of the Andor discussion shows, but Andor is the best Star Wars show for fans who aren't fans of Star Wars, but it's annoying because just by the name of it, it's probably the one that's the least likely to draw anyone else in. And it's one of those kind of annoying paradoxes. It's when I talk to friends, I'm like, if you're going to watch any Star Wars show, don't watch Mandalorian, don't watch Kenobi, just watch Andor. It's just an amazing show. And even if you've never even seen any of the Star Wars movies, it's so good. And so I love Mando Series 2 as well. But yeah, I just think Andor is just so elevated in so many other ways. So with that in mind and things, with Mando Series 3, When you obviously it was announced and you kind of the build up towards it, what are you kind of hoping for in this season? Because obviously last season we got some huge cameos, and we will talk about it because obviously I wouldn't imagine anyone's listening to this who hasn't seen all the other ones. So obviously Luke comes into it, and Ahsoka, who's a very popular animated character who I love, you know, Luke being the big one, and that was like, oh my god. And now the worry from I think some Star Wars fans is that are they just going to keep doing big cameos? And with Book of Boba Fett it was like, is Luke just going to keep popping up? So what do you kind of think going into Mando Series 3? What are you kind of hoping for, and potentially what are your maybe concerns?
Let me start with the concerns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I really was kind of glad to be done with the Lone Wolf and Cub story. Like, I kind of wanted something different. I thought that 2 full seasons of this Grogu story and trying to get him to where he was supposed to be, and it was beautiful that he finally got him there. And the way that they ended it with Luke Skywalker coming to get him, taking him away, like, I thought that that's an awesome way to wrap that storyline up, and let's get something brand new going. So I was a little surprised when immediately they went right back to that. Like, before we even came back to Mando 3, he's already gotten back together with Grogu and started off on an adventure. And so, as cute as he is, you know, like the way I love Andor so much, I like my Star Wars a little bit more grown up. I don't care as much for the cute stuff. I understand why it's there. Definitely has probably created some Star Wars fans with that character. And he's great. He's cute. He's a little baby. He makes little baby cooing sounds, and he's great, but we had 2 full seasons of it. So I don't know. I guess that's my only concern, is treading in the same waters again for a third season. At least where we're at now is we know that Grogu is with him. And we'll get to it later, but it almost seems like he's now not preparing him to be a Jedi, but possibly to be a Mandalorian, which is interesting. It's an interesting concept. So that could kind of bring me back around on Grogu. Otherwise, I'm just looking for some new stories, and maybe a little bit. I do like the villain of the week type show that they're doing here, but maybe a little bit more cohesiveness, like a little bit more like week to week, where you're hanging on after episode 2 because you really need to see what happened for episode 3. A little bit of a cliffhanger, and actually have the story play out as one big long story, but still going through and doing the classic Western storytelling where they're traveling town to town and planet to planet and solving problems for other people and stuff like that. That's great. It's like Kung Fu, right? It's a classic way to tell stories, especially with the Lone Wolf and Cub thing. Like, a father and son traveling through different lands and having to help people out along the way. But I guess, I don't know. I've loved them so much. I don't need a lot of cameos to enjoy the show. So I kind of hope they don't rely on, I don't know who's left, to be honest. Like, you did Luke Skywalker. The stuff I get excited about, I love seeing characters pop up from the animated shows. I think that's a lot of fun to see a live action version of characters, and we've seen a lot of that here. Maybe we'll get some more Ahsoka just to gear us up for the Ahsoka series. But I don't know what big names are left that I need to see. I got to see Cad Bane, which I was, really excited when that happened. Like, I was blown away. Wasn't expecting him to show. I always wanted to see a live action Cad Bane, but actually seeing it was like, I can't believe they did that. And it was awesome. So I'd like to see him again, but I don't know. I don't need anything. I don't need any cameos. Just good storytelling, man. Like, Andor might have spoiled me. That's one worry that I have. But I have to not lower my expectations, but change them to like this is the hybrid Star Wars. This is like a little bit adult storytelling, a little bit of kid storytelling, kind of mixed together. So that's where I'm at.
Putting it. That's a good way of putting it. Mando is like, not to be insulting here to any fans, because they're all Star Wars fans, whether you've seen just a few of the movies, or if you're like me on the opposite spectrum and are consuming all the content and books and everything else. Any Star Wars fan who's listening to this, or any type of Star Wars fan, if you say you like Star Wars, that's it. You're a Star Wars fan in my eyes. It doesn't matter how much content you consume. But I will say, Mando is for the normies. It's for the people who, you know, and that's not a problem because we need content like that. And I'm so happy that so many new Star Wars fans have come into it from Mandalorian. And because of the mixed reviews of the sequel trilogy, we needed a home run. And I think Mandalorian Series 1, especially Series 2, really did that. And that laid the groundwork for something like Andor to really get the footing it needed. You know, I think if the sequel trilogy came out and then we just had Andor, I think it wouldn't have hit in the same way, unfortunately. But it's one of those, it is a bit of everything. And I think my concern somewhat is it's going to become too generalist, as you're kind of alluding to there, where it's going to be not enough of anything that any particular group of people would want. You know, it's not going to be cutesy enough for certain individuals. It's not going to be young enough for the kids, but it's not going to be mature enough and complex enough. And, you know, with Andor, it just doesn't, it's very subtle, the subtleties with Andor. And as you say, with Andor, like every episode when it ended, I was like, I want to watch the next one. You know, when I started it, I was like, meh, you know, the first 3 episodes I thought were really good, don't get me wrong. But when each episode was going, I was like, yeah, I'm quite interested. But then once we got the heist stuff, kind of, I think episode 5, just before the finale of the heist arc, I was like, I just want more of this. And once we saw episode 6, that heist, I was like, I am 100% bought in. And then we got obviously the phenomenal prison arc as well. So for Andor, I was like, just needing to see the next of it. It was just like, you know, with Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon or any of these sort of big budget HBO style shows, you need to see the next episode. But with Mandalorian, because as you say, it is episodic and it's cool and it's fun, and it's like watching Mandalorian, I'm like, this is really cool. Like there's a few connections here to like nods to other content. I like how it's kind of expanding the universe, and this is kind of becoming, I think the Star Wars films going forward are going to either kind of be one-offs, or they're going to be like really, really old Republic stuff, like people have been clamoring for with like the Legends games, you know, but when the Jedi were first about, obviously the Sith has been talked about for so long, and Legends went into the Sith a huge amount, and in canon there's barely anything to do with them yet, so they're going to be the big movie stuff. But I'm like, Mando has kind of cut its own little way in there, and I'm excited by Mando. You know, when this was coming out, I was like, yeah, I get to go home and watch more of something I love, but I wasn't like, I'm not as excited for Mandalorian as I am for, say, Ahsoka, or even now Andor Series 2. And so I'm kind of in a similar ballpark to you. It's Andor has taken away from Mandalorian a little bit, because I find that with Mando and Kenobi and Book of Boba Fett, I was like, okay, it's never going to be above this level of storytelling. Yeah. It's just Star Wars. I just have to accept it's going to, all the best storytelling in Star Wars is, some of it's going to be in the animation, but a lot of it's going to be in the books or the comics, and then the films and the series are just going to be really cool and fun and exciting, you know, and really like a good experience, less so than actual truly talented, great storytelling. Not that people involved aren't talented, but you know what I'm kind of saying. So I'm in agreement with you there, and it's, now that we've seen what Andor can do, I'm like, okay, well, Mandalorian's going to keep doing what that does, but like if Ahsoka is more like Mandalorian than it is like Andor, and then if whatever other live action shows are going to be coming out, there's something called Skeleton Crew that's coming out with Jude Law, and that looks quite interesting. But it's like, I want them to more be like Andor, or like Andor's only going to have 2 seasons, I think, and it's like, well, I hope that if that ends and Ahsoka and Skeleton Crew aren't going to be like Andor, we are going to get something that is going to be like Andor, because if it just becomes, if the next 5 years are going to be Mandalorian-esque shows, even myself, I'm going to watch it all, but I'm going to start to be a bit like, yeah, I'll watch it because it's there, but I'm not like clamoring for it, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. I think, and something I've wanted for a long time is, and I think a lot of fans have been talking about this forever, like, let's get outside of the Skywalker saga. And as much as they play with characters that aren't Luke Skywalker and that family of characters, we're still in that era. It's still either right before or right after or during. And so I still feel like we haven't quite got away from that yet. Like, and that's what I'm really waiting for is like, and Andor is the furthest, I feel like, because it went, I guess, other than, does that go the farthest back? No. So Solo probably goes the furthest back, right? In terms of the films.
What, as in what's the earliest?
Earliest in Star Wars lore in films and series.
I think the prequels were technically the earliest, but sort of it's almost like the parameters of the Skywalker saga is kind of like Phantom Menace is one end, Rise of Skywalker is the other, and everything's kind of fit in the middle. But yeah, Solo and Kenobi are around the same sort of time, but we don't, in live action, we haven't had much like directly after episode 3. We're kind of getting these like 10-ish year kind of jumps, as you say. So, but Andor, I think, delved into something that we haven't, like the Empire stuff. We've not seen the bureaucracy of it on any of that.
Yeah. No, and it was great. It was great storytelling. And I think one of the best parts of that was it was like mostly new characters or characters that most normies didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We might know them because they showed up in an animated series or something like that. We've seen them somewhere. We saw them in A New Hope. But most people aren't familiar with the names. You know, most people aren't like, oh yeah, I know who that is. Only like pretty diehard Star Wars fans recognize characters in that show. But I want to go to where we don't know any of the characters, like stuff from the books. I want like old Sith stuff back when there was like, you know, a ridiculous amount of Sith.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to see like these Sith schools that they went to like learn the ways of the dark side. Like I want to see that stuff with characters we've never heard about on any of the films or series yet. Like that's what I'm really looking forward to. But for now, Andor's it. But if they can do like the Andor formula as like tell a more adult story, a little more mature story with these characters no one's ever heard of, like that would be it for me. I'm waiting on that.
100%. Yeah, I'm in agreement completely. That's what I want. So let's delve straight into I say straight in. We've been chatting around it for a while, but let's chat straight into this first episode. So we'll dot around and things, but what did you find just as a general thought when this episode finished? How did you feel? Did you feel somewhat satisfied? Is it what you kind of expected? What was your like shorthand review of the episode as a premiere?
I would say overall, I think it did its job of setting up what this season is going to be. I wasn't overly ecstatic. I wasn't like, yes, I'm all in now. But I also wasn't like, man, not looking forward to it. Like, I'm good. Like it set it up. It told us the new mission that he's on. It let us know how important it was to him. And like, I think that was the main thing they were trying to get across in this is like, this is really important, you know, and not everyone believes it's important, but he does. And this is why. And so it gave us the setup. He's got Grogu back, but he's on his own mission now. His mission isn't for Grogu anymore. But along the way, it seems like he's going to kind of teach Grogu the ways of the Mandalorian. And that has interesting implications as well for like later on in the future. Like, what could that be? You know, somebody with force powers in a like suited up as a Mandalorian, you know, can't take his helmet off and he can like move things with his mind. Like it just seems like a formidable character. Yeah. But yeah, I thought overall it was a setup episode. It was just kind of laying the groundwork, letting us know like this is what the season's going to be about. This is the mission for the season. Where are they doing 8 episodes? Is that what it is?
Yeah. Yeah, which is pretty. It's fair. I'm glad they're kind of sticking with the 8 because, you know, although everyone who knows me when it comes to Star Wars stuff, a lot because I generally try and stay more positive with Star Wars, especially on sort of the Star Wars comic show that I do. a lot of people, and I've had people contact me, be like, "Oh, but Mike, you love all Star Wars content, don't you?" And it's like, no, I do not. I enjoy the vast majority of it, but I can be critical. But it doesn't, just because I enjoyed something, it doesn't mean that it did hit everything I wanted it to do, in a sense.
Yeah.
And I felt similar to you. I was like, it was really cool. I think I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I think I kind of, in my mind, I enjoyed Mandalorian less than I did, because I liked Mando Series 1. I think it's really cool. But when that first came out and everyone was like, oh my God, this is the best thing of Star Wars ever. And I've been like consuming a lot of the comics and stuff at the time. And I was like,
yeah,
and especially the animated stuff with like Clone Wars and like Star Wars Rebels for me. For me, Star Wars Rebels is the best Star Wars content that exists. I think the original trilogy is probably the objectively the best, and Andor is, if season 2 of Andor is as good as season 1, I'd say Andor is the best Star Wars content that exists. I'd say it even dwarfs the original trilogy. But for me, Rebels gets there because of the emotional beats of it. And I won't spoil Rebels because I'm also doing a Rebels show with Dave and Math as well. And my goal in life with Star Wars is to get people to watch Andor and Rebels. That's my thing. Is like, if you like Andor, go watch Rebels, okay? It's not quite as dark, but there's a lot of common threads there, and there's a lot of emotional beats that you wouldn't expect from an animated show. But with this episode, I was like, I came away and I was like, that was really cool. I enjoyed that. It had a lot of fun, little humorous moments. It was a little bit too short, I found, for a premiere. I was like, when it came up in the runtime, I was like, 36 minutes. And I was like, oh, that's not that much. And One thing I forgot to ask was, what's quite bizarre is, I don't know how I feel about their recap, where they literally did not touch Book of Boba Fett. Like, I don't know why they didn't at the start say, previously on Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett, or some even mention the Book of Boba Fett at all. Even at the end, when the episode ended, even if when it comes up and says next episode to watch, it could have come up in things saying, waiting for the next episode of Mandalorian, you want to know what happened between Grogu and Thingy, watch Book of Boba Fett. Because the amount of people who I've said, like, you need to watch Book of Boba Fett, and they went, I watched the first 3 episodes and I just gave up. And I was like, but you need to watch episode 5, 6, and 7. But at the time, I couldn't really tell people. But now there's like people I work with, and they're like, "Oh, Mando Series 3 is coming out." And I'm like, "Yeah, but you didn't watch Book of Boba Fett. Just skip over the episodes you didn't like. I don't care. Just watch episode 5 and 6, and 7's important too. But you need to watch them." Like, what did you think about the recap? Because I was genuinely expecting like a 5-minute long huge recap for anyone, but they didn't touch it, and it surprised me.
So I guess I didn't notice it, and maybe that's because I just already have it in my head canon. Like, I already know what happened, and so watching the recap, it just like, I didn't realize they didn't mention that. So did they not mention anything about Grogu now being back with Mando? Like, the last thing that we saw is him being turned over to Luke Skywalker, and then all of a sudden he's with him again.
Yep, there was no mention of Book of Boba Fett.
Yeah,
there was no mention of the
strange
ship at all, because obviously the Razor Crest is gone, which I think we saw that at the end of Mando Series 2, but it doesn't explain how he got the sort of modified N1 Naboo starfighter. It doesn't explain what happened to Luke or anything like that. It's the recap, because I watched it not because I needed to know what obviously the recap was, but I was just interested to see if, like, how much because I thought, if the recap's going to be like 5 minutes long and is going to like explain everything, I would tell people, you can probably skip Book of Boba Fett. I'd recommend those Mando episodes because they're fantastic. But then I was like, they did the IG-11 thing, and I was like, okay. And then they did like 1 or 2 mentions, I think, I think they did actually with Book of Boba Fett. There was something the armorer says that only is in Book of Boba Fett, and saying about how when Mandalore was like bombed and destroyed, those conversations she had with him that were in Book of Boba Fett, that was there, but the Grogu stuff was not touched, which I found to be quite odd. But it's weird with Star Wars because it's such an interconnected universe, and they want you to consume so much content, and I'm just confused, like, why. For example, with Andor, if I was in the marketing department, I would be pushing when Andor finishes to get people to watch Star Wars Rebels, because that's the closest thing to Andor, and there's going to be threads in Andor that heavily link to Rebels. Stuff with Mon Mothma, there's stuff that's already been kind of hinted at, mentions of stuff that's going to happen. So I'm like, it's peculiar to me. And even in this episode of Mandalorian, it was subtle, but when they were in hyperspace, which is a really cool scene. You saw the silhouettes of those creatures in space, and they're called the Purrgil. And I'm not going to say what they do in Rebels, but it's a very major part of Rebels, which is probably going to be a major part in the Ahsoka show. And so those little mentions, I'm like, cool, that's nice. But you watch YouTubers, and at the end of a YouTube video, a thing pops up and says, watch, here's a playlist of stuff that's related, but also check out my videos on blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, Disney create Disney Plus. So they can make it do anything. And I don't know why at the end of every Star Wars episode, you watch something, instead of being just the one thing you could watch, it comes up with 4. And it goes, want to know what happened to Grogu? Book of Boba Fett. Want to find out, what was, do you want a grittier, more story-driven show? Or, why they don't have just like one little sentence and then you've got the 4 panels and really pushing people to go out there. Because with something that's clearly going to have such an impact on Rebels, it's not hard to find, but you go on there and it's not prioritized at all. Clone Wars is the big animated show, but Bad Batch is being promoted at the moment, and then Tales of the Jedi was also being promoted, and you have to kind of almost scroll through to find it, which I found very peculiar. But did you notice that stuff with the Purrgil in the hyperspace and any of that sort of jazz?
Yeah, and I was talking to someone else about it as well, and they're like, how important do you think it's going to be like in this series? I'm like, I don't know about in this series, but somewhere down the line, maybe, with the other series, with Ahsoka, or who knows what else they're going to do. I don't know when that Skeleton Crew, what is that? What is Skeleton Crew? Where does that take place?
I think it's around,
no,
I think it's allegedly around the time of the Mando. It sets place in the Mando verse, they're kind of calling it, which is like 5-ish years, for about 5 years after Return of the Jedi. And so I think because it's Skeleton Crew, Ahsoka, and Mandalorian. They were going to do Rangers of the New Republic, but I think that's been canned now. And then there was rumors of like another show, but I think it's all just around that same kind of that period. I'm not overly sure. But swooping back into the episode itself, so what did you find? Like, we had that first scene with the Mandalorians, and that I tried looking up what that giant creature thing was, and it seems to be called on Wikipedia a dinosaur turtle, which is, I looked at it and I was like, that looks like a giant dinosaur turtle thing, but I call it a crocodile turtle. So what do you think of the whole stuff with we can go across all the stuff with the Mandalorians in this episode. Like, what did you find about the armor and the Mandalorian lore? Like, how did you find that kind of opening and things?
Well, at first, when it first opened, I thought maybe we were watching a flashback.
So did I.
Like, I was like, oh, is this Mando? Are they going to show us like Mando first getting the helmet? Like, is that what's going on? Or, something like, I thought that was him as a kid is what they were showing us. Oh, it makes perfect sense. And I think they wanted you to kind of, think that, because that is what they were driving at, was like, this is why it's so important to him. This is how early they're indoctrinated with it. This is how early they receive their helmet. That's why it's so important. Like, it's told to them probably from the age of being able to understand things, how important it is to get this thing. Just to get it, they have to earn it. And then once they do, they have to take this oath from a child and wear it for the rest of their life. So imagine that being built up your entire life. Like, in a tribe, it's like you have to do this before you can become a man. You have to go on this vision quest or whatever to become a warrior. And they build it up your whole life. This is coming at the age of 13. You're going to go out in the wilderness and you're going to face the beast or whatever. And, it's that sort of thing that they build up in their religion. And then, like, I just thought it did it perfectly. Yeah, it wanted you to think that was him, and then he swoops in and kind of saves the day. But I found it an interesting way to do it. They're like in kind of like New Mandalore. They've got their little settlement here, it looks like, and they're just doing what they can with the land that they found. Now that their planet is gone, and I thought it was a great setup, because everything about this season seems like it's going to be the wider arc is going to be around this journey to go redeem himself, to wash themselves in the what is it, the spring, the waters.
I can't remember the exact name,
Mandalore or something. But I'm wondering if it will be the whole season's arc. Like, is he not going to reach it until episode 7 or 8? Or is he going to wrap it up in like 3 or 4 episodes and then something else is going to be driving the story? I'm curious. But with this first episode, they're definitely setting up everything you need to know, and they want you to have feelings about this mission that he's on, like realize how important it is. So they gave you like how important it is to the Mandalorians, how much of a rite of passage it is, and how important it is to not remove this helmet. And so also you feel how devastated he is that he's like this outcast, this apostate now, right? And so that's why I thought it was such a good setup episode, because they gave you all this context. I still find it weird though, like even in the episode, they touched on when he goes to Navarro, they touch on Grogu still being with him. Like it's mentioned. But they don't go through the whole like, well, I gave him a choice. He was with Luke Skywalker, you know, like that. It was just, he was just like, well, he's with me now, and I'm going on my own mission. But like I said, once again, they're just stating what this season is. Like, Grogu's not as important this season. It's about this new mission. I'm sure the story, the heartstrings are going to be pulled with that relationship throughout the story, like protecting each other and whatnot. But the main crux of the story is like him redeeming himself in his own eyes.
Yeah.
So it's kind of I dug the opening. It was a lot of like awesome Mandalorian action, like people flying around with jetpacks and a lot of blasters, and like you got to see all the different weapons that they wield. Trying to fight off this beast, which even with all their weapons, like they're no match for.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely quite interesting, and you kind of got to see how the Mandalorians worked, because it's a lot of us who watch the Clone Wars, we've seen some minor Mandalorian civil war. In Legends, there was like huge amounts of it, you know, of the Mandalorian Wars was one of the biggest wars in the whole galaxy. And in the canon, it's like the Mandalorian Wars happened. We don't know how big they were. I would assume they're going to be a similar sort of scale as they were in Legends. But at the moment, it's just like in animation, we saw some Mandalorians do some quite cool fighting and things, and we've seen like bits and pieces in the last 2 seasons of Mandalorian. But this was the first time you actually see a group of Mandalorians fighting. And although they, to be honest, they kind of got their asses kicked a little bit, it was still interesting seeing all their different armor and weaponry and that kind of stuff, as you say. And so what do you feel about Navarro, and obviously Carl Weathers? He's brilliant. I love him. And like his Grief Karga is the character's name, and Navarro and all this build up. How did you find like going in there? Like when my experience or my kind of impression was when Mandalorian was walking through with Grogu, I got a little bit of the vibes of one of I think the most core and pure elements of Star Wars that people appreciate, and that is comparing to the cantina scene. And that is the way that Star Wars is more of a space fantasy than an explicit sci-fi, because just walking down the street and being a background extra who's had like 6 hours of makeup put on them just to walk past out of focus. You know, I think they probably have got more easy things like some masks you put on, so it's probably a little bit sooner than that. But you know, that kind of idea where you're walking through the city and it's like just the lore of it and the feeling of everything. And I really enjoyed that. And that's one of the things I love so much about Star Wars. So with Navarro and Carl Weathers and all that kind of stuff, and the pirate gang and things, how did you feel about that? Because I also thought the pirate gang, I've heard people complain about the facial prosthetics and stuff, but I felt the opposite. When me and Megan watched it, I was like, that Nikto, the main guy, Vane, I thought that is some of the best alien prosthetics I've seen maybe ever. I was looking at it, I was like, I can't see anywhere on there that even looks like it's a human wearing a mask. That looks like alien leathery skin. So how do you feel about that? Everything I've basically just thrown at you.
I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the whole thing. It kind of gave me Empire vibes when they go to the, what's the Cloud City? Cloud City.
In Bespin,
Yes. It reminded me a bit of that, just coming into this place, and there's like all these people who are established there, and like this the guy's their leader. Love Carl Weathers. I'm like really pumped for Creed 3 this week. So like anything to do with Rocky, I'm like a fanatic. So like Carl Weathers, seeing him again, I absolutely love it, dude. I love whenever he shows up. I like that he's like been promoted now. He's kind of running things. And asking, I found it kind of, I don't know. It was kind of funny. So he's asking Mando to come and be the marshal, which I don't know. You definitely know it's like that's not his thing. Like the only time he would ever do something like that is like when he's done with everything. But I feel like he's a wanderer for sure. Like he's a bounty hunter. He's out on his own. Which it just going back to it, it was kind of different to see all the Mandalorians together like that, because you're used to seeing them solo, right? Like in terms of being bounty hunters, like you don't see like 40 Mandalorians hanging out. So it was interesting to see him more like a tribe or a community. But I love that world, and I agree with you 100% on the prosthetics. I thought I was going to ask you, with the similarities in name and the similarities in facial features, like, is this the same species as Cad Bane? Because they looked so similar. Not all of them, but at least that leader, Vane, he had like the same shaped face. It was just different colored. Like he wasn't blue.
So there's the Vane was a Nikto, and there are 3 variations of Nikto, usually just coloration and very mild differences in the sort of the horns on their chin, or some of them have like kind of horns going back a little bit more. But Cad Bane is a Duros, but he looks a bit different because he wears the cowboy hat, for lack of a better word, and also he's got like the breathing tube things coming out of like his sort of throat way. But he is technically a Duros species. He looks like, the way I describe Duros is the stereotypical how aliens look, as in like really old sci-fi, you know, big heads, big eyes, no nose, you know, that kind of thing. You saw, there's a game, Star Wars Battlefront 2, the more recent one, that has got a campaign mode in it, and there's a character in that called Shreve, and he's a Duros. And you do see in the Cantina and in New Hope, there's a couple of those. The Nikto are generally associated with thugs a little bit more. They often have the horns. That's the main sort of differentiating feature. It's kind of like Duros are usually more smooth, like a smooth-headed round alien thing, whereas Nikto is kind of sharpened in a way. But I know what you mean, especially around the nose area. I think it's because obviously hiding a human nose, and I think with Star Wars what they've kind of learned from the prequels to a degree is try to do less CGI where you can, and try and do more more physical effects, because physical effects don't age badly. You know, you watch A New Hope, and the only parts that are jarring are the bits that George Lucas has added in with CGI from the late 90s when he made the special editions. But when you see, you know, the Cantina scene, still to this day, they look real, because something that looked real 40 years ago or plus, if it looks real to a person in real life, you know, back then, it basically looks real still now. So I think the thing is the kind of nose part, which is they have to kind of, you know, pad out that. But aside from that element, I think it still looks amazing. But yeah, long story short, Nikto is that species, Cad Bane is a Duros.
All right. Well, good information to have. I'm sure the listeners will appreciate like the background. I also too, because he's a pirate, I was like, oh, maybe this is like a thing of that species, is like maybe that's in their culture or something. Like
it's quite common, to be fair. Not necessarily in Duros. I think Cad Bane's more of a unique, but with Nikto, it's like in Jabba's palace, for example, in Return of the Jedi. There's Weequay, and there was one of the Weequays in that gang as well. There's Trandoshans, which the most famous Trandoshan is Bosk. There was one of those, you know, in that little sort of pirate gang as well. Quarren, which are the ones with the long tentacles, they're quite commonly associated with those as well. So there are species that are more commonly associated with crime and that sort of elements in Star Wars to a degree. So you're definitely right there in that kind of thinking.
Yeah. I feel like I'm profiling at this point. Like, what am I doing? Well, they look this way. They must be criminals, right? Like, if they're from that planet, they're no good. but yeah, I definitely enjoyed that scene, and kind of Mando stepping in, even though he is not going to be the marshal. He kind of stood in as the marshal for me. You know, he came in like, "Is there a problem here?" It was very Marshall-esque. Um, and I would love to get to see Timothy Oliphant's character
Yes.
again. That would be fantastic. Like that's my favorite Marshal of the Star Wars universe right now. So, um, but yeah, that entire portion of like while they were on Navarro was great. It was like you said, it felt like Star Wars. It felt like it's you're in the Star Wars universe for sure.
And I really like seeing the Anzellans, which is made.
Yes.
They were so cute. Like in Rise of Skywalker, there's many issues of Rise of Skywalker, but I do still enjoy the movie as a whole. But Babu Frick in that film is amazing, and I think he's hilarious and cute. And I know there's listeners who, not most of my listeners aren't like this, but the common complaint, especially from Legends fans, is like Disney shill. You know, Grogu's cute, Porgs were just made to sell merchandise, and Babu Frick is like. Right, Disney is a business, okay? Everything they do is to sell merchandise. Every single conceivable thing is to sell merchandise, to get people to watch their content. Like every single production company on this entire planet, that is what they do. Star Wars, when George Lucas controlled it, you know, back in the original trilogy days, he made the most of his money from merchandising. One of the ways that Star Wars set himself above other franchises is George Lucas was like, I'm getting all the money from merchandising. You know, 20th Century Fox can get money from the films primarily. And then he put all of it into the figurines, and everyone in that sort of generation remembers the Star Wars toys. So, just to argue someone who's not even making an argument with me, yeah, Porgs were created by some sort of department to make cute animals. But Ewoks were not dissimilar from that, you know? There's always been cuteness in Star Wars, and I love the Anzellans, and that bit where Grogu hugs them, I killed me. I loved it. And he was like, Mando was trying to grab him and stuff. And I think when that was happening, I think they used stop motion as well. I think that Mando, when he saw his hand go in and the Anzellans move and Grogu, it looked quite a lot like stop motion, which I also appreciate because that, again, in Star Wars history especially, they used a lot of stop motion and it looks good and looks real. So I loved all those elements as well.
Yeah, more practical effects, especially when a real person is interacting with the thing. It looks so much better than CGI. No matter how good the CGI is, it's always going to look better if it's a real thing they're grabbing or a real thing they're touching, whatever, or even looking at. Because you can, you know, sometimes you can even tell if they're looking at like this big creature or whatever. Like, you know, they're just looking at some green dots. You know, they're looking at like a stick or something, and I don't know. It doesn't come off as well as if there's an actual person there or an actual thing with eyeballs to look at. So yeah, I loved that. What are they called? The Anzellans?
Yeah.
I love that you could understand everything they were saying, and yet they acted as if a translation was needed with everything. And I don't know, like, and at first Mando didn't even understand him. He's like, "What are they saying?" And it was, and eventually he was like, I got it. I understood that. I understood what you're saying. But just the way they say everything was really funny. Like, bad baby, you know, they were awesome. And, the idea of going back and getting the, IG-11 is fun to me. Cause I remember like that was one of the coolest things. And that was it the first or second episode of Mando?
It was very first. I think he actually was with IG-11 and they found Grogu, and then he was like, "Oh, this thing's a baby. It's not just a package." And then he kind of shoots IG-11 and then Quill sorts him out. But yeah, you're right there.
Yeah. But I did find it kind of weird though that there was like this. They couldn't decide whether or not it was possible to fix him. Like it went back and forth the entire time. Like it was like, oh, well, he can't be fixed. And then it's like, well, I need him fixed. And like, okay, well, these guys can fix him. And then they're like, hey, they're saying they can't fix him. And he's like, oh, you can't fix him, but I really need him fixed. And they're like, well, if you get this part, we can fix him. And he's like, but otherwise, or even if we get this part, it won't be the same. It's like, okay, but I need him. I really need him. And then they're just like, well, if you get the part, we can definitely do it. And so I was like, really, I don't know why it took so much time to establish that it was possible to do it. But I'm looking forward to that in this like for them to go to Mandalore with a functioning IG-11. That's going to be a fun episode whenever that happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. My critique of this episode to a degree is, I know Star Wars does this a lot. They did it with Darth Maul, and I think Darth Maul as well, his comeback is some of the best Star Wars content. I think Darth Maul in the Clone Wars and in Rebels is phenomenal. So it was one of those things where, yeah, he got sliced in half. How did he survive? You know, dark side kind of hand wavy nonsense. But like with IG-11, I love IG-11 and I'm happy he's back. And I kind of often feel this way when they do bring back characters. I'm always like, that doesn't really make sense, but I'm happy they're in it. And it's like with IG-11, it was like it was pretty final. You know, his death
is exploding. Yeah,
it was like his bottom half of him was melting in lava, and he blew up with a thermal detonator. Where did his corpse go? I would have thought surely it fell back in the lava, and the rest of him would have melted. And also a thermal detonator in his chest that blew up and killed all of the stormtroopers around him. But he was just a bit burnt up. Like, I know IG units are meant to be quite sturdy, but I'm like, oh, and Mando could just, you know, poke him with a bit of like a soldering iron, and then he came online again. And you're like, this is a little bit too much. You know, I feel like there was almost too much of IG-11 that survived. But it's one of those things with Star Wars. There has to be the suspension of disbelief to a degree. And for me, that did jar me a little bit. And in the recap, IG-11 was in the recap, and I was like, I even said out loud, I was like, why are they putting... At first I thought, they're doing a recap of everything, and this is going to be like a 5-minute recap. And then the recap's like a minute long, and I was like, why is IG-11 in that? And then I saw the statue, and I was like, maybe that's why? And then it kind of made more sense as it went on.
Yeah, they were just giving context for this episode with that recap, which it reminds me a lot of like X-Men, the animated series. Whenever they do a previously on X-Men, they would do just relevant things to what you're about to see. So they might go back 20 episodes, but it's giving you something that's relevant because like, oh, this character is going to show up again. So you need to know what happened last time they were around. I dig that, but I also like just like one episode bleeding into the next and not having to, you know, be like, hey, remember this? This is going to come into play again. It's less of a surprise too, because when they do that, it's like, oh, well, we know what's coming, or something to do with that is coming. I would say that I don't feel like there was a real like emotional connection or anything to this IG-11. So why couldn't he have just went and found another IG unit somewhere, which presumably be just as good, right? Like a functioning, working. I don't understand. Is this at this point? Is this the only one left in the galaxy? And maybe that's it. Like,
maybe. I think there was one line from one of the Anzellans that was something along the lines of, it's really hard to find the memory bank, or there's barely any left. But I feel like what Mando should have said, or he should have gone to Grief Karga, he should have gone, I really want this one. And he should have gone, there are no IG units left. They were all gone. There were barely any when the Empire were about, and that was years ago. There's none left. That's why IG-11 was so fearsome. And then go, okay, I need someone fearsome. This is the one droid. Not, I trust him a lot. It's like, but you just brought him back to life next to Grogu, and he tried to kill him. And you're like, oh yeah, we'll just tweak his memory. It's like, so you're actually undoing the own logic, which is you don't trust droids because you can reprogram them. You have one that literally just tried to kill Grogu, and you're like, I'll reprogram him. It's like, but you can reprogram any droid then. So I get that criticism completely.
Loved the original Terminator homage that they did. Like, it was so dead on. It was exact. He was even saying like terminate as he was crawling his upper body. I was like, oh man, this is this is straight from the finale of Terminator.
100%.
It's cool.
And it was scary, not like scary, but it was like when it happened, you're like, oh, oh shit, it's like seeing IG and like man, like shooting at him and it's doing nothing, and it's that obviously the bust of Grief Karga falling on him, and the man who did that cheesy line, where do you use your head? Yeah, exactly. Some people online have said this is proving that Mando has really become a dad now because he's doing dad jokes, and I was like. Okay, I think it's a one-liner, maybe to reference, with Terminator, things like that. Arnie, especially Terminator 2, had some cool ones. But yeah, I really liked that part as well. So we're starting to get towards the end here, because we chatted for a while, like getting, in grips of the show and things like that. But there's two sort of main parts. Cara June, she was just kind of hand wavy as, oh, she's off in the special forces. It's like, I'm glad they didn't say she just died, because then if they do end up deciding to get, regardless of one's own political leanings and things, I think Gina Carano was really cool as Cara June. I really liked her character, so
I did too. I love the character. Yeah,
it's one of those. I'm glad they didn't just say she died, because I'm like, okay, there's hope she'll come back, or maybe they'll just be like, we don't want to associate with Gina Carano anymore, but we're going to have her character in books or comics, whatever. But I like the fact they did at least address it, and she didn't die. But the other parts are about, there's the pirate attack, and then him going to Bo-Katan. So the pirate attack and the action scene in the asteroid belt, and the pirate king Gorian Shard, who seems to be like a new species. I got vibes of, there's a film called Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I don't know if you've seen it, but in there they've got things called Vogons, and I just got real big Vogon vibes from that guy. But what do you think of that? Because I really enjoyed the whole asteroid belt scene. It kind of really showed Mando as a proficient pilot and how good his new ship is. But what did you think of that element?
Episode 2 vibes, man. Like it felt so much like when Obi-Wan leads Jango Fett right into the same, like a big asteroid field, and it even looked similar, even though he was using like the ship's blasters. It looked like the same effect of those mines exploding. And at first that's what I thought it was. I was like, oh, they're doing the same thing, which I thought that's some of the best stuff from episode 2. I feel like is the Obi-Wan going and finding out about the clone army, 100%. And then like all of that, and then being tracked by Jango Fett, and the appearance of Boba Fett, and we get his backstory of like why he has such a grudge against. I loved it, but that scene especially, I always thought was really cool. Just the effect of those explosions in space and the like reverberations, the sound that it made. It sounds fantastic in the theater, like just surround sound. But yeah, I love that. I love that they did that, because it all these little things to just like little nods to other things that they did in this without doing cameos necessarily, but still doing nods to stuff, like pop culture nods to stuff, or nods to other Star Wars content. I like that. I like that sort of thing. And so that's what I got from that. Very much reminded me of prequel trilogy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think that linking you with one of your earlier comments in this is where this is like this episode was definitely setting up a lot of stuff. I think there's so many different avenues. So you've got the Mandalorian culture stuff, which is set up, right at the very start, and you've got the overarching story. Then we've got kind of the pirate stuff is, Mandalorian, and that I have to keep looking down to remember his name, King Gorian Shard. He's obviously going to be some sort of, I doubt he's going to be like the air quotes, a big bad of all of the Mandalorian. But in this series, he's probably going to pop up probably 2 more times. I suspect what's going to happen is Mando is going to go off, go bathe in these waters or something, probably mid-season, kind of linking what you said before. I think then he's going to kind of come back and be like, oh, I'm going to go and reunite with my people and figure out what to do. And then in doing that, he's going to go back to Navarro, and then that the Pirate King will have done something there and attacked Navarro or something like that, or before he goes off, he's like, okay, IG's all fixed, let's go to Mandalore. Oh wait, this Pirate King's now attacking me. This is another kind of hurdle. So I think he's going to come into it and be some sort of foil in some ways, and probably you're going to be this episode, we're finally going to get that thing. Nope, he's gonna halt it a little bit. But I liked that, and I like it's a new kind of villain, because in the movies and in the other series, we haven't quite got that. We got like a little bit of it in the Book of Boba Fett, but not quite. So I'm quite intrigued to have someone who is criminal underworld kind of style. You got it a bit in Solo as well, but this guy who looked quite fearsome is quite different. Has clearly got like a lot of resources, because that ship he had was massive.
Yeah.
And it's like he could be quite fearsome and ruthless. So I really liked that element. So is anything else regarding him before we move on to sort of the final part with Bo-Katan?
I think you're probably right I think he's going to be, either they're going to go and do something on Navarro, like you said, or it just might be the story of them tracking him across the galaxy, following him, maybe even all the way to Mandalore and trying to take
Mm,
him out.
that's a good shout.
Maybe some kind of weird showdown on this like crystallized Mandalore surface. Like, I don't know. It would be cool.
That would be very cool. That's a good idea, actually.
Yeah.
I very much like that.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. But you're probably right about it being like the bigger villain of this season, for sure. Yeah, I think so.
And then the last scene was Bo-Katan. Now, obviously, there's not quite rumblings, but there was hints, especially at the end of Mandalorian Series 2, which is she's very proud. And as people who've seen Clone Wars and Rebels, like, she is capable of some, like, people see her just a Mandalorian. She's like, oh, Bo-Katan's amazing. And it's like, I think she's a great character, don't get me wrong. Very cool. But she was literally a terrorist in the Clone Wars, literally committed war crimes and killed a lot of people. Like, she was actually a villain for a few episodes before you kind of got her connections. And one of the things I got noted down was that the place that she was is actually, it's called Kalevala. And it's the homeworld of House Kryze. So it's where she's originally from and where her sister is from as well. And people of Clone Wars, this is a very minor spoiler, but Clone Wars has been out for a while. Obi-Wan Kenobi actually has a love interest, and he almost left the Jedi Order for this love interest. That was Bo-Katan's sister. I'm not going to say what happened to her, but she's not about at the moment. It's pretty clear, but it's very intriguing. So that's another reason to go back and watch the Clone Wars, because Satine is a really interesting character, one of the leaders of Mandalore. But with Bo-Katan, what do you kind of think when she came into it? And what's your general kind of view of Bo-Katan as we start to kind of wrap up this episode?
Well, I love the live action version of her. I thought it was cast really well. Every time I do that, every time I try to like think of something else, Battlestar Galactica. I loved her in Battlestar Galactica. That's where I first became a fan of this actress. And then finding out that she's gonna be part of the Star Wars universe, I'm like, perfect, man. That's perfect. And there's similarities in the characters and just from one to the other. Just in terms of her being like a real like gritty, ground level rebellious character. Very, like you said, proud, kind of stubborn character. And I did find it interesting because when they went to this planet and they said, and then he goes, and that's a Mandalorian castle where we're going. So that was kind of cool. And then I'm guessing she's sitting on the throne there. So she's like the leader there right now, but she's been abandoned by it. Solely because she doesn't possess the black saber anymore, the dark saber anymore. Which was given to Mando at the end of season 2, right?
Yeah, he got off Gideon.
Or he took it.
Yeah. He beat Gideon in combat. He used the Beskar staff thing and got it.
Yes. I think this adds another element to the series. I think she's a great, like, I don't know what you call it, like almost like a conscience type character who's like giving you the other side of the coin, like other stuff for Mando to think about. I wonder how it's going to play out, because she, since we've seen her, has been about like, all your religious Mandalorian stuff. It's like it's pointless. It's a waste of time. There's no magic. There's no power. There's no, and you can't rely on this stuff. And basically it's, like what an atheist would say about religion, right? And she's like the Star Wars universe atheist. And I think the way she's always telling Mando these things, I think something's going to come along to really make him question whether or not like that is the path that he wants to continue to follow forever, like to be a Mandalorian. Like with all these things, just taking your helmet off, it's silly. Just like people have arguments against religion, like there's silly rules in here. Why are these rules at all? Taking your helmet off, it's like committing a sin, right? And like Christianity, you commit a sin and then you have to be forgiven. And if you're not forgiven, you don't reap the rewards of going to heaven. So it's similar with the Mandalorians. Like one of the great sins is taking off your helmet. It's one of the deadly sins. And she's just like, you're putting your life in danger for a silly notion. Like, why would you go do this? The planet's gone. There's nothing there. It's poisoned. And, she's like, whatever. I mean, go if you want, but, you're stupid for doing so. This is a waste of time. But I do think that that's going to be that's going to be a little nugget like in his brain going forward, always kind of bugging him, like, how important is this really? And at the same time, he's trying to teach the Mandalorian ways, it seems, to Grogu, because they're flying in the ship at one point and he's telling him like what the important aspects of being a Mandalorian is, being able to track through the galaxy and navigate and stuff like that. And so I think that's going to come into play by the end of this season, is like this questioning of his faith and like whether or not it's still who he is and who he wants to be. Maybe he'll discover something about the faith that he doesn't like that he's really like, oh, I didn't know this aspect, and it really changes how I think about the Mandalorians. So one more thing I think to add to the story is like him questioning his faith, crisis of faith at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good point. And it's going to be very interesting. Yeah, I think there's going to be some sort of culture clash between the Children of the Watch / the Armorer and what she kind of believes in and her kind of clan, and then Bo-Katan. And obviously the Darksaber is a very crucial part of that, I think, as well, and Bo-Katan desperately wants it. And it's going to be the case of, is she going to be mad at Mando for following this religion or this aspect of Mandalorian culture she doesn't agree with and try and forcibly take the Darksaber? Is she going to fall in line? Is he going to go onto Bo-Katan's side and go against the Armorer? I think it's all of these elements are going to come into play, as you say. So, yeah, we've basically tackled most elements of this episode and things. So before we do any plugs, I also want to say Grogu spinning himself in the chair with the Force cracked me up. Yeah, I love that. Very cute. It's like if a baby had the Force, it's like that is what you do, and him like doing that and like putting like a Smartie or whatever it is, like a little sweet thing to himself, and it's like. All of us have thought, maybe when kids or maybe when adults, what would you do if you had magic? What would you do if you had the power of Star Wars or Harry Potter or some of the Marvel powers? And, people want flying and time control and kind of crazy stuff. But if you could use telekinesis, you'd think, it'd be so amazing. What you'd really do is you'd be sat on the sofa and you'd be like, I want that thing over there. I'd be so lazy. I'd be like, I want some crisps out the cupboard. And I just use the Force, open the cupboard, open the pack, and then just have Doritos flying across, like a stream of Doritos flying across to me. But are there any other elements that we have not yet tackled about this episode before I let you do some plugs?
Yeah, one thing that I wasn't really expecting that Bo-Katan brought up was the person who has the Darksaber can like command the army. And I wasn't even thinking about that because I picture Mando going on his own solo missions, right? I don't think of him leading an army, but is that going to come into play? Is he going to lead an army somewhere? Is he going to like, take command with this Darksaber? Because that is something he can do with it. And most likely I'm thinking, because you put this in my head about, the pirates doing something on Navarro, does he lead like a Mandalorian army with the Darksaber back there to save Navarro?
That would be amazing.
And then maybe like the end of the season, he doesn't want to be the marshal, but he sets them up with some marshals from the Mandalorian order.
That's a good shout. I really like that. I hadn't thought about that element. I was thinking way ahead. I was thinking like, because of in series 2 of Mandalorian, you got Ahsoka and she talks about Thrawn, and obviously Thrawn is a major character in Legends. And then in the canon, once again, guys, it's my buzzword every time I talk about Star Wars Legends. Star Wars Rebels, I mean. Watch Rebels. He's like a major part in Rebels. And so I think what all the Mando content and Ahsoka, it's all kind of building up to the Heir to the Empire trilogy by Timothy Zahn, the 3 books. That's kind of the big thing for Star Wars Legends. That was what kind of sparked a lot of the books and a lot of the intrigue in Star Wars outside of the movies. More so, there was a few comics and things going around, but they were the big things in Legends and in the novels and stuff for Star Wars. And I think the Mandoverse and Ahsoka and Skeleton Crew, all of this is kind of going to be doing what the MCU did in a sense. Over the coming years, it's all their own individual stories, but there's going to be some sort of convergent point where I imagine Thrawn's going to be the big bad. It's going to be the last of the Imperial remnant, and it's going to be this big battle. And I wonder if Mandalorian is going to have citizens of Navarro and the rest of the Mandalorians who are left, and he's going to be like leading a charge with the Darksaber. I'm thinking that's going to be like the end game sort of epic event of the Mandalorian series, but much more local. You saying about the Mandalorians we saw in the first episode helping Navarro, that's a really cool idea. I hadn't thought about that, and I think that would be a really good thing to see, and I think that would really help the Mandalorians as well kind of find a bit of purpose and meaning for themselves. So there's a lot of ways you could go. I didn't think about that. Very nice. Is there anything else you want to tackle about this episode before we do plugs?
I don't think so. Looking forward to next week, man. I'm looking forward to the rest of the series. I can't say it's going to be hard to top season 2, and it's really going to be hard to come even close to Andor. So, expectations are. I'm trying not to have any. I'm trying to just like enjoy it for what it is, like I do with most Star Wars content. I will tell you that I already like this better than Boba Fett after one episode. Okay. So, there's that. I mean, it's definitely not bottom rung, and it has potential to be up there with the best if they continue to do great stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good points. Very good points. Well, that's amazing, and Brett. Well, please plug away. I'll include links in the description to all of your amazing content and things. But yeah, tell people where they can find you, where they can listen to your amazing voice, and then I'll give my plugs and we'll wrap up. I'm going to make this short. I always go on a long tangent trying to describe every podcast, but I'm going to give you the short version. I have a podcast called Long Lost Brothers. It's a kind of a bro hangout podcast where we talk about fitness and we talk shit. We talk about pop culture. We talk about MMA. We talk about boxing. We talk about everything you can imagine two guys would talk about if they were just chatting on the phone. And then you can check out Marvel Plus. That's my MCU podcast where I break down all the Disney Plus Marvel series week to week when those shows are running. And there's a Patreon for that where I break down the movies as well and stuff outside of the MCU. And then I have my straight entertainment and pop culture and life stories podcast called Daily BS. I try to put up episodes out daily, at least a few times a week. Short, sweet, 10, 15 minute podcasts about TV shows, movies, comic books, novels, what have you. So those are my plugs. Daily BS also has a YouTube channel, so there's a video version of everything over there. And that's it. So go check me out if you're interested at all. 100%. And I would echo, like, I like all of your content, but I would say Daily BS is one of those podcasts which is perfect to subscribe to. And what I do is I subscribe and I keep an eye on some of the episodes that come out. Not every episode that is released on there is going to appeal to everyone because you tackle such a wide variety of things. But the beauty of it is things will just pop up, and in a day you'll be like, oh, I've got 10 minutes spare. Or what I do is I'll, over like a couple of weeks, I'll be like, oh, there's one, oh, there's one, oh, there's one. And then I'll have like a longish drive and I'll be like, I'm just going to listen to Brett talk about like 4 different things in these just in a row. So I'd always recommend to anyone listening, go subscribe to Daily BS, because kind of like the elevator pitch for a genuine chit-chat, you're not necessarily going to be interested in every single release, but there's such a wide variety of stuff and so much content. It's just great just to have in your podcast app to kind of just see. There's always going to be something cool. So yeah.
That real quick, that reminds me, so something I used to do with the Daily BS podcast is I used to, at the end of each week, combine them all into one long episode. It was called Weekly BS. And it's exactly what you described. It's just like a collection of 3 or 4 different topics or movie reviews or what have you, where someone can listen for 45 minutes to an hour, So maybe I'll bring that back. That sounds cool.
Yeah, but in any case, listeners, go subscribe to Daily BS. There's no excuse not to. There's lots of nerdy stuff he talks about on there and lots of non-nerdy stuff. And as I'm a film buff, so I was really enjoying listening to your Northman review as well. And I listened to like 3 of them like earlier today as well, actually. But yeah, you can find, and Brett, I'll put all your social media and also the links to each of your podcasts in the description. And then any for YouTube onlookers, you can find me at Genuine Chit-Chat on Instagram, Twitter, and on Facebook. If you're watching, you're at the Genuine Chit-Chat YouTube channel, so there's all my Star Wars content for the other weekly discussion shows we've done. There's Star Wars comics and canon. There's my Genuine Chit-Chat stuff. And the weekend of this being released, there's another conversation with another Star Wars author, Kevin Shinnick, who's worked with George Lucas. He's directed Stan Lee. He's done loads of cool stuff. So subscribe to the YouTube channel. Lots of fun there. Follow me on social media. And if you're listening to this podcast and you're interested by Star Wars, no excuse to not check out Star Wars comics and canon. You never have to have picked up a Star Wars comic in your life. I go through plot details so you don't have to, and talk about many connections. But thank you, friends, so much for listening. We really appreciate you. And obviously, thank you to Brett for spending time speaking with us. It's always a delight chatting with you, Brett. Can't wait for more MCU shows to come out so I can hear you talk about them. And yeah, just thank you as always for coming on, dude. It's always appreciated, and I'm sure my listeners love it too.
Yeah, awesome time as always, dude. And I'm always available to come back, and it's an open invitation to come on any of my shows anytime you want to talk about anything, dude. Love talking to you.
Thank you so much. I love talking to you too.